In this Elden Ring video, I'm going to be showing you my Royal Knight build. This is a level 150 version of the Frost Knight build that sort of upgrades it and changes a couple things about it. So first up, let's talk about the new addition to this, which is the Royal Greatsword. This is a colossal sword that deals both physical and magic damage, deals substantial magic damage and physical damage, has possibly one of the highest attack ratings in the game, and its weapon art, Wolf's Assault, has been buffed in patch 1.04, so it actually triggers a lot faster, has better recovery time, and the damage on this is absolutely staggering if you can land the initial attack and the AoE. The initial attack is much harder to land in my experience, but the AoE is almost guaranteed if you can get anywhere near the enemy, particularly if you're fighting big enemies. And it works really well for groups of enemies as well because it has kind of a huge AoE area that will, hit and almost pretty much one-shot anything inside of it that gets caught in that AoE. So it's really, really good in those scenarios. Another thing I really like about Wolf's Assault, besides the awesome animation, is the FP cost is only 20. If you're using Carry and Filigree Crest, this goes down to 15. That's not a lot. If you have 150 to 200 FP, depending on your setup, you're going to be able to use this 10 to 12, 13 times before you need to, pop a blue flask, which allows you to, get away with very, very few blue flasks and keep a lot of health flasks, which is great. This weapon also has a significant stat spread, meaning you need 26 strength, 22 intelligence, 18 dexterity in order to use it. And it's one of the reasons I actually decided to use a great shield with this build. That and that the Clayman's Harpoon also scales with strength when you're using the cold infusion. However, being able to put 26 points or having to put 26 points into strength in order to even wield this weapon with one hand means that, a few more points and you can use a pretty good great shield. Do decent block counters, just have a great shield with you. Kind of falls into that knight theme that we were talking about in the Frost Knight playstyle. Being able to use block counters or being able to use Ice Spear, well, now you can use Wolf's Assault, or now you can use block counters, etc. And again, we don't need any, weapon skill on the shield, so this allows you to use Wolf's Assault, while you have your shield out, which is great. So moving on to Clayman's Harpoon, you're going to use this very similarly to the way you did in the Frost Knight. You're going to have Ice Spear on this, allowing you a ranged option. You're going to have both of these weapons equipped at once, which is going to allow you to swap back and forth between them on the fly. You're going to swap to Clayman's Harpoon when you want to use Ice Spear to maybe attack something at range before it gets to you, or maybe there's an AoE around it, you just can't get to it, so you're ranging it with Ice Spear. And again, this weapon art has huge stagger potential, meaning that you can stagger enemies very, very easily with it. So you're going to want to lead with this before they get to you, and then probably swap to your Royal Greatsword, and then block counter or use Wolf's Assault to finish them off. What I really like about having two weapons here is it gives you a lot of flexibility on what you can do, and you'll notice that Clayman's Harpoon also scales with strength and intelligence very well. So even though the damage is less because it's not a colossal weapon, you can do block counters with substantial damage and substantial poise damage as well. You can attack while blocking with it in scenarios where you're not sure what enemies are going to do. And again, because you're using a great shield, you're going to be able to attack enemies more easily with block counters, because they tend to rebuff off your attacks when attacking into a Great Shield. The Great Shield I'm using here is the Eclipse Great Shield. It has decent guard boost at 75. It's probably not the highest that you could get for a shield at this point, but you're trying to balance between your overall equipment weight and, protection and guard boost that you gain from a shield. And if you go higher in equip weight, then you have to put more points into endurance in order to be able to medium roll, which then pulls some point out of damage. So there's a fine balance here between how good of a shield do you want to use versus how much damage do you want to do. We're leaning a lot more into the damage side of things with this build, so our shield is probably the minimum great shield that I would use in a great shield build in terms of guard boost and protection. And it only has a 32 strength requirement. Even though our strength is much higher than that, we could use a better one. I don't want to add that much weight and sacrifice other attributes that increase our damage. However, you can if you want. When it comes to armor for this build, I'm using the Haima Glintstone Crown. This gives me an additional couple points of intelligence and strength, which fits perfectly. Both of our weapons scale off those predominantly. And it reduces your FP cost by a little bit, which isn't a big deal because you have plenty of FP already. I'm also using the Tree Surcoat and pieces of the chain set to round out this build, and really the reason for that is because if I go too much heavier, then I have to put more points in endurance. And, more points in endurance means less points into attributes that increase damage or less points into vigor, so we have less health. So there's a fine balance here between how much protection you want to have and how much damage you want to deal, so that's why I went with that. But you can do whatever you want there, as long as you can medium roll. When it comes to talismans with this build, I have Shard of Alexander, Carrion's Filigree Crest, Great Jar's Arsenal, and Radagon's Sword Seal. Shard of Alexander increases the damage of Wolf's Assault and Ice Spear, so it's really good. Both of those abilities hit kind of hard. Ice Spear sort of drops off at this point of the game compared to how it was doing at level 100, but Wolf's Assault hits like an absolute truck, and you want to boost that even further if you can. Carrion Filigreed Crest reduces the cost of both of these weapon skills, which is good. It reduces Ice Spear by 3, and it reduces Wolf's Assault by 5. That's a significant amount of savings, which is why I have it here, allowing you to use it liberally and not really have to worry about FP. Great Jar's Arsenal increases your maximum equip load by about 20% roughly, and we have it here because we're using a Great Shield, have 2 weapons equipped, and have medium armor. So without this, you would have to go even more points in endurance, which means even more points out of stats that are going to increase your damage. So it's really not an option here unless you want to wear like really, really light armor or like no armor, which you could. Or if you only want to use one weapon at a time and then unequip them and re-equip them, you know, given the circumstance what you're fighting. But that's not really easy to do mid-boss fight. Like if you realize, oh, I can't hit this guy, he's got some AoE around him, I want to use Ice Spear, but now I have to go into my inventory, equip it, and come back out. Very, very hard to do, which is why I don't recommend doing that. And lastly, Radagon's Sword Seal is here for a couple reasons. First, it adds more endurance, which means that we get more equip load, which we need again, or we have to pull points out. It also gives you more health, which is good. It also gives you more strength, which increases your damage, and it also gives you some dexterity, which helps you meet the requirements of the Royal Greatsword. We don't really invest in dexterity for points here because it has very bad scaling in terms of dexterity. Both the spear and the Greatsword do, or the Colossal Weapon do. So you don't really want to invest in dexterity, and this helps you get points in there that you don't really need in order to meet that requirement. We're giving you a bunch of points elsewhere that, you know, really benefit the build. Of these, you could probably pull out Carrion Filigreed Crest and replace it with like Ritual Sword Talisman. I like the convenience of being able to use a weapon art multiple times. I feel like the overall damage output is higher that way, being able to cast it more times versus more damage in a single cast. But, you know, that's something that you could swap around depending on the circumstance, and that's really up to you. However, I don't really recommend the Magic Scorpion Charm if you want to use that because you have Radagon's Sword Seal, which reduces your protection already. If you're equipping the Magic Scorpion Charm with that equipped, you're really going to take a lot of damage. So generally how this build works is that I'll run around on the landscape, usually with the Great Sword out, although it depends on the area. Sometimes I'll have the Spear out. Keep in mind that normally one block counter with either of these weapons will stagger most regular enemies, so it doesn't really matter which you have out. If you're fighting a group of enemies, the Royal Greatsword is a much better option because it has horizontal hitboxes with your Art 1, meaning that you can cut through multiple enemies with one slice, or if you use Wolf's Assault, you can AoE a bunch of them at the same time. And Spear has like very, very narrow hitbox, and it's usually just straightforward. So it's better in circumstances, you know, where you're facing one enemy at a time rather than a group. Or maybe you're fighting a difficult enemy and you want to be able to block and attack at the same time. Also, Ice Spear is really good to use against enemies that you can lock onto specific body parts, where you can like lock onto their head or their leg or something like that, where it has like a selectable part, because this usually staggers them much more quickly because of the stagger buildup, because they usually take more stagger damage in those locations. Or it's just good in circumstances where you need some range. One thing that I want to mention is that I have absolutely 0 spells slotted for this build. So if you're somebody who doesn't like to buff, doesn't want to have to deal with, you know, some sort of hybrid build in terms of magic and melee, this is a really good build for you. You just equip this stuff, you run around, you swap weapons as necessary, and you fight, and you don't ever really have to go and, you know, do anything else, which is great. However, I will mention that if you do want to add, you know, some spells to this build, you can. And one that I would highly recommend if you want to do that is Scholar's Shield. This will buff your shield to give you more protection and increase the guard boost so that it takes even less stamina damage when you're blocking. Although you have pretty good guard boost as it is, so you shouldn't need to do that. But nevertheless, if you want to do that, you can. So stats I have for this build are 50 Vigor, 26 Mind, 32 Endurance, 52 Strength, 18 Dexterity, 52 Intelligence, 14 Faith, and 9 Arcane. So Vigor is at 50 because you are going to take damage. You are a kind of tanky build, but because you have Radagon's Sword Shield equipped, you're going to take more damage than you would otherwise. So your protection is kind of low. You don't have Golden Vow in this build. You do have a Great Shield, which is going to prevent you from taking hits, but when you do take hits, you're going to take substantial damage, which is why we have 50 Vigor there. 26 Mind is there to give you enough FP to use your weapon skills, you know, regularly. You actually lose some FP because of the helmet that we're using. It's not a ton. But you should be able to use your weapon skills, you know, 8-9 times easily before using a flask, which is like maybe 2 flasks between each side of Grace, or maybe 3 at most. So you can go very, very heavy to the HP side of things and, just have very few FP. 32 endurance is there because we need that for equipment weight. It's also good for stamina. Anytime you're doing a block build, having more stamina is good, particularly if you're not using Barricade Shield. So it's kind of a double-edged sword there. We get it for stamina and equip weight. We have 2 weapons equipped. One of them is a colossal weapon and a great shield and armor that's medium weight. So you got to have a good amount of endurance combined with that Great Jar's Arsenal Talisman in order to be able to medium roll here. If you don't care about medium rolling, then you probably don't need as many points, or you can swap out the Great Jar's Arsenal, but I feel like it's kind of a must-have for most builds. When it comes to strength, we have 52 here. That's partially because of the helmet we're wearing, which gives 2 points to strength and intelligence. The damage on these really starts to drop off after 50 in either strength and intelligence. So if you wanted to put 48 points here in each of these and get 2 from the helmet to just round it off nicely to 50, you can. You could put the other 4 points into mind if you want, and then ditch the Carrion Filigree Crest, and use a different talisman like Ritual Sword Talisman, like I mentioned, or maybe you want to use the Curved Sword Talisman to increase your block counters. These are also options you can do. 18 Dexterity is just to meet the requirements for the Royal Greatsword. It doesn't really scale well with Dexterity, neither of these weapons do, so we don't really put any more points into it than necessary. 52 Intelligence is pretty much the same reason as Strength. Great increase to magic damage starts dropping off after 50. I didn't add spells to this build because I didn't feel like 52 Intelligence was really enough to justify using spells regularly. You don't have a ton of FP, and you're not going to deal tons of damage with spells with this build. So you're probably better off using your weapon skills. You'll probably outperform them in terms of damage to FP cost ratio. So I don't feel like using spells that are offensive with this build is a really good choice. You can add them if you want, but I don't really recommend it. 14 Faith and 9 Arcane are just there because I'm a Confessor. If you're a different class, these will be lower. You'll probably have points in other attributes and have a better spread. You don't need either of these for this build. A couple things I want to mention before I wrap up this video. First, you do Frost buildup with the weapon art of the Royal Greatsword, but you don't deal it with its normal swings. I don't know why you don't with it, considering the description, but the weapon art does deal Frostbite buildup, as does the weapon art and regular attacks of the Clayman's Harpoon, because we have Cold Infusion. So you can set the Frostbite status effect using this build. Even though it isn't a huge focus, it's still nice to know. And lastly, if you're going to use the Flask of Wondrous Physique with this build, I recommend using the Magic Shrouding tier in order to increase your magic damage. Both of these weapons deal magic damage. The weapon arts deal magic damage, so this is a good fit here. And the Green Burst Crystal tier increases your stamina recovery. I love stamina recovery in my builds. This is a great way to get it. You're going to be blocking a lot with this build. So getting that stamina recovery during boss fights is going to help maintain your blocking, as well as allow you to attack more and still block. Stay tuned for more Elden Ring build guides as we keep pumping out level 150 endgame builds.